Justice Summit by the book. I'm so excited to be here. You know, we've been doing these summits now for 7 years, but this by far is the most exciting summit. I cannot wait to hear the panelists that we have today. We're going to be delving into some of the most critical issues affecting the criminal justice system at this time. So we're going to talk about what is justice and what it means. You know, Plato said, "I do not know what justice is, but I know what it is not." And that is very true when you think about it, because it's something that we take for granted, that we believe in, that we hope for. But the reality is that we don't understand and appreciate justice unless we are deprived of it. And in many cases, the definition of justice is the correction of an injustice. And that's really the spirit that we're approaching the summit today. We have 3 action-packed panels. Our first panel celebrates the 50th anniversary of a novel that really defined American justice in the 60s, and that's To Kill a Mockingbird. And many a lawyer was motivated Atticus Finch and his closing argument in that case, which in many ways represented the civil rights movement that was to come and had already begun. We have best-selling authors. We have a real-life Atticus Finch, Tony Serra, who is here and has motivated so many of us to do what we do. Let's have a round of applause for our sponsors today. Let's get down to it. So before we get started, I want to introduce someone who's a wonderful leader in our community, and that's Priya Sanger. She's the president of the Bar Association of San Francisco. Priya?
Hi everyone, thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me on behalf of the Bar Association of San Francisco. My name is Priya Sanger. I'm in-house counsel actually at Wells Fargo here in San Francisco. I'm also president of the Bar Association of San Francisco. BASF, as we know the Bar Association to be called, has had a long history of partnership with the Public Defender's Office. A strong public defender like Jeff Adachi is crucially important for administration of justice, and then so is a San Francisco conflicts panel for indigent defense administration, which the Bar Association has provided in partnership with SF public defenders. So in San Francisco, when a public defender has a conflict of interest, criminal defendants and minors are represented by private attorneys from a panel administered by the Bar Association of San Francisco. Maintaining this independent body of attorneys is critically important as a well-run public defender's office. We are each other's complement. We are the sum of the parts that makes whole the criminal defense working so well in San Francisco. In 2003, the Superior Court contracted with the Bar Association of San Francisco's Indigent Defense Administration to provide comprehensive and cost-saving oversight to the administration and billing associated with conflicts. So, Julie Tron is the director of the court's administration and has been working with Jeff since 2003 to ensure that indigent defense panel services are effective and that we do all we can to prevent recidivism. So thank you, Jeff, for allowing us to be here and co-sponsor this event, and thank you all of you for coming here.
We're also going to talk about the written word and how powerful it is in terms of our perceptions of the justice system.
Captured me. That was exciting. I didn't realize that literature could do that.
Now ask our first panel to come to the stage. Murphy, participate in the panel via Skype.
Hi. Let me try to. How's that?
Hi Mary, how you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Great. So we have here via Skype, she's live from New York City. I always wanted to say that. And Mary is the author of a book about to kill a mockingbird that she wrote last year, Scout, Atticus and Boo. And she's directed and produced a film about To Kill a Mockingbird. We're going to watch a clip from that in just a moment. Next we have John J. Osborn, and if you went to law school, the one book that you would have read before going to law school was The Paper Chase. And this is a book that John J. Osborn wrote, and it's really become a classic. And it, of course, spawned an Oscar award-winning film of the same name, and also a television series. But he's also written an incredible article about To Kill a Mockingbird, so we're going to ask him about that. Next we have Paulette Frankl, and Paulette is a courtroom sketch artist. Now how cool is that? That's a pretty cool job. And she spends a lot of time in the courtroom, and that's how she came across Tony Serra. And she spent 17 years compiling the incredible book that she's put together. It just came out, and it's called Lust for Justice. And it's a book of incredible illustrations, artwork, as well as a narrative. And right next to her, we have Tony Serra. And Tony Serra is the most prolific trial lawyer of our times. He has tried more cases than any other living lawyer. And if you've ever had a chance to see him in court, it is just a sight to behold. It really is. And we're so grateful that he could be here today. He's trying a triple homicide case now in Oakland, and he has a jury out waiting, so you may get called away. But we hope you're able to stay for the panel. Finally, we have Sheldon Siegel, and Sheldon Siegel is a corporate lawyer who has written a series, I think 7 books now, of a fictional criminal defense attorney named Mike Daly, who actually lives here in San Francisco. And he's written a series of books, and these books have been shown and transcribed and read throughout the world. So we're going to start now with a clip, a video clip, and then we're going to go to the panel.
I think it is our national novel. If there was a national novel award, this would be it for the United States. I think it's a favorite book of almost everybody you meet.
It was the first time in my life that the book had sort of captured me. That was exciting. I didn't realize that literature could do that.
I read a tattered copy in my house in Jamaica, Queens. It was the first time I read a book by a white writer that really discussed the issues of racism in any way that was complicated and sophisticated.
touchstone in American literary and social history. Its story gently tugged at the seams of racism.
She was in that pantheon of people who helped us get liberated from racism in this country.
Harper Lee's first and only novel.
Masterpieces are masterpieces not because they are flawless, but because they've tapped into something essential to us, at the heart of who we are and how we live.
A masterpiece and a mystery.
And of course one kept hoping, waiting for the next novel. Sadly, that never came.
I cannot imagine what drove her into silence.
Thank you, I prefer to pass.
What did you say?
Well, I have nothing relevant to say concerning the case. However, when I have something relevant to say, I shall raise my hand.
Mr. Hawk, you step down here. Here's a dime. Call your mother. Tell her there's serious doubt about your becoming a lawyer.
You are a son of a bitch, Kingsfield.
Stop! That is the most intelligent thing you've said today. You may take your seat.
The greatest counterculture lawyer of his time. His trials have garnered him acclaim as one of the greatest criminal defense lawyers of the century. He's the white tornado in court, the semantic samurai, a shaman, a bard, a hero to some, the trickster to others, and always a force to be reckoned with, respected by all. Lust for Justice, the radical life and law of J. Tony Serra is a no-holds-barred examination of the man, his renegade lifestyle, his resolute beliefs, and the legal system he serves and transforms. Filled with murder, drugs, and death penalty cases, snitches, the psychological elements of crime, the nullification of and nexus with juries, closing arguments, and more. Lust for Justice pulls the black robe off the justice system to reveal what it is, a railroad to prison for minorities. Author-artist Paulette Frankl followed Tony Serra in and out of the courtroom for more than a decade to capture in words and images this man who embodies justice and drama at their best. In Lust for Justice, you view the law through the eyes of one of its greatest practitioners, and you'll never look at it the same way again.
The oldest man on death row is eyeing me from his wheelchair. Despite his frail appearance, his grip is firm and his baritone is still forceful. "Welcome to the road, Mr. Daly," he says to me. "We need your help. We're running out of time." More than 650 inmates are awaiting lethal injections on California's death row. Every one of them is running out of time. Thank you for coming in on such short notice, he continues. Did you have any trouble getting inside? Nothing out of the ordinary, I tell him. I think to myself, sometimes it seems harder for lawyers to get into San Quentin than it is for our clients to get out. It took me an hour to fill out the stack of forms, sign the multiple releases, and pass through the 2 metal detectors before I was locked inside one of a dozen windowless 6x6 wood cells, separated by interlaced steel bars covered by scuffed plexiglass. The death row visitors area is just a stone's throw from the little green chamber where the state of California conducts its executions. It's a dark reminder of the burdens borne by the denim-clad prisoners who pass their time going about the mundane business of being incarcerated while their lawyers try to prolong their lives.
Hey Mary, you still there?
Hi, Mary.
Hi Mary, how are you? Yes, you there? We're going to recall it. Let's start off with we're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird and what that book meant. You wrote an article about it, and John, and as a law professor, it was something that you focused on as part of legal education. How did you choose that, and why?
Wow, I just want to say it was wonderful to see the actor portraying Atticus Finch. That was really great. And as I watched that, I thought to myself, and I want to know what Tony thinks about this, I thought, there is no chance that Tom Robinson is going to get off. You know, that was such an ineffective appeal. Now, is it a wonderful speech? It's a wonderful speech. Is it beautiful? It's beautiful. Is it incredibly well written? Yes. Is it going to work? There's no chance. Tom Robinson must have been listening to that and going, oh my God. You know, there's a trick that's being played on you in To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch represents the last Republican lawyer. And I mean Republican in the sense of the Republic of Thomas Jefferson, those kinds of people. The last lawyer who really believes that to enunciate these important principles of America is going to work. This is in a town where their first reaction, I mean, Tom Ewell is a kind of incredibly evil, disgusting person. Everybody in town knows that. But they believe him. You know, they're willing to take his word, even though they know he's lying completely. They're willing to take his word. They're willing to go out and try to lynch Tom Robinson. Right? They have taken one of their upstanding citizens, Bo Radley, and locked him in the attic. He's been there for God knows how many years. Has anybody in town done anything about it? No, it's fine. Lock your kids in the attic. That's the kind of town you're dealing with. But since we're seeing this through the eyes of Scout, of a child, we have to dig into it ourselves to understand what's really going on. And once you do, you realize that Atticus doesn't have a chance. There's nobody to appeal to. Right? He's going to lose. And the moral of To Kill a Mockingbird isn't that Atticus Finch is a great lawyer, or the lawyer that we should follow. The moral of the book and the movie is that the Republican lawyer won't work anymore. We need a new kind of lawyer. The only way to clean up a town like this is to bring in the federales. You know, everybody's got to go to jail. I mean, these, you know, if you think about it, who is the real hero of To Kill a Mockingbird? Who's the one who sees clearly? It's not Atticus Finch. He's not even a very intelligent father. I love him. But who lets your kids out in the middle of the night dressed as farm animals and fruit when there's a crazed killer who's vowed to get them? You say, fine, you don't need me to walk you home, you can do it yourself. Is that smart? Is that a good dad? Bo Radley is the only one who actually has it straight, right? He knows those kids are going to get into trouble. He's out there, and he does something about it. You know, he's the one who gets justice in the book. You know, and so when you really think about it, if you can cut through this wonderful vision of the child, if you can stop looking at this problem from a child's point of view, then you'll get a new take on To Kill a Mockingbird, I think. You know, one that's much more actually meaningful to you. So,
okay, thanks. Mary?
Yeah?
Oh, great. We lost you for a minute there.
I know.
Yeah. So tell us, how did you choose To Kill a Mockingbird as a subject for your book and for your film? And, you know, what made you take this on as a project 50 years after the book was published?
Well, my adult rereading of To Kill a Mockingbird made a far greater impression on me than my adolescent reading ever had. And once that happened, I started to, just to satisfy my own curiosity, I started to find out as much as I could about both the novel and the novelist. I was a producer at CBS News for 20 years, and I would frequently pitch this as a story idea. But my boss, you know, it's a news department, and my bosses would say, no, Harper Lee, no news, no story. And since Harper Lee hasn't given an interview since 1964, it seemed unlikely I would be the person who would get her to change her mind. So when I started doing my own documentaries, which is about, I started my own company about 6 years ago, I read the novel again. I did a little more reporting, especially about, you know, the summer of '60 when the novel was published, and I began to see that the story I could tell was the story of the novel, not so much the novelist, and the incredible impact that the novel had on the civil rights movement, on lives, on careers, and on readers to this very day. So that to me seemed to be a story worth telling, and that's when I started working on the documentary.
And so tell us, how did you arrive at your understanding of the impact that the book has had, particularly on race relations? And, you know, so many people cite the book as a reason why they went to law school. Why do you think that's true, particularly in light of the fact that Atticus lost the case?
Well, I mean, it is true that, and in the research I've done, many people do say Atticus Finch is the reason that they went to law school. I mean, because this is a lawyer who stood up and did the right thing despite what his neighbors or his family thought. And the thing that's kind of interesting to remember about Atticus is that this is set in the 1930s. It's not set in the 60s. And Atticus was a court-appointed attorney. And what he really did was he gave his client a vigorous defense, which was not expected. And in fact, what's kind of great about looking at the movie version of To Kill a Mockingbird is the jurors, some of the jurors are like sitting in the jury box reading the paper because, you know, everybody figured they knew how this trial was going. And that, you know, that tells you something sometimes about what a trial can do, not just for the people who are on trial, but for everyone who's watching it. And Atticus did something that his neighbors and and parts of his family didn't even expect him to do. I think what's interesting about the novel in the summer that it hit is You know, America was a very deeply divided place, especially in the Deep South. Segregation was still not yet against the law, and particularly for white Southerners, this novel, which caught on, you know, famously and quickly, it gave white Southerners a way to think about how they were raised and to think about the system in which they were raised. And it did so perhaps in a way that a treatise of political speech didn't do, because, you know, it was told through the eyes of a child. It was a popular story that wasn't just about race and tolerance. It was about growing up in a small town. It was about coming of age. It was about love. It was about loneliness. It had all this suspense. I mean, the novel had so many elements with which to draw people in.
So there's a tremendous amount of mystique about Harper Lee. I know she never wrote another book. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and the film won the Academy Award, yet she never wrote another book. What did you learn about Harper Lee and her reasons?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to get great access to two very close friends of hers, Joy and Michael Brown, who are a New York City couple who actually gave their friend Harper Lee the money to quit her job as an airline reservationist and write full-time for a year, and they remain very, very close, dear friends to this day. The other person I was also very privileged and fortunate to talk to is Alice Finch Lee, Harper Lee's older sister by 15 years. Alice is one of the first women in Alabama who was ever admitted to the bar. She at 99, she's the oldest practicing attorney in the state. She continues to practice every day, and she hopes to celebrate her 100th birthday in September at her law desk. So she was quite a character and told me quite a bit about how the Lee girls were raised, and her answer to that question is, she quoted her sister saying she couldn't top what she had done, that she had nowhere to go but down. And I think the combination of this kind of overwhelming fame, the somewhat autobiographical nature of some of what she was writing about, and the not wanting to disappoint yourself, let alone all the other people that are out there waiting for a second book, all of that to bring about the fact that we don't seem to be getting a second novel from such a wonderful writer.
Thank you. And your film is opening nationwide. You're premiering in New York, so we'll be looking for your film. And your book is available. We have it here in the lobby. It's available on Amazon. Now, I'm going to go to Paulette and then go back to John on this question. But Paulette, you've seen so many trials as a well, first of all, how did you become a courtroom sketch artist? I mean, that's not a usual profession for people, even artists, to see. How did you get involved in that?
Just about everything in my life has been dumb luck. And I ended up in a courtroom while waiting for somebody. And I've been an artist all my life, and I always carry a sketchbook with me. So while I was in this trial, which happened to be a good trial, most trials are incredibly boring, I was sketching, and I thought, I can do this. And I found it exciting, and I was looking for the emotional moments in the trial, of which this particular one, it was rich. And the lawyer on the trial said, well, if you're looking for drama in the courtroom, there's only one person, it's Tony Serra. He's drama and the law at its best. He wears funky old clothes from the thrift. He goes to the podium without notes. He's incredibly hard-hitting and perceptive. He drives old clunker cars. He has long hair. He's just the opposite of everybody's image of a lawyer, and this is the person you want to draw. So that's how it came to be.
And you spent 17 years on the book. Did you follow Tony's trials during that time?
I followed Tony in and out of the courtroom for about 10 years. Being in Tony's presence is a lot like getting an overdose of X-rays or something like that. He is intense, and Once he sort of dumped this book on me. It was never intended to be my book. It was supposed to be my art and his book. And one day he came schlepping lots of boxes to my cabin in Bolinas and said, "Here, it's your baby, I don't have time." And I was left crushed under the avalanche of his enormous life that was both fascinating and it had so many different sort of tributaries to it. I had never written a book before. I'd written journals and some articles. I mean, I consider myself a visionary, and my head isn't filled with words, it's filled with pictures, but I'm capable of describing the pictures that I see. And so, anyway, I began this journey of 1,000 miles with, one step at a time, the shrapnel of his life all over my floor, and trying to put together this puzzle, which became so frustrating that I kept running away from it as much as I embraced it. I finally ended up 2 states away to kind of get my own perspective on things, and I now live in New Mexico, which is where the book ended up being finished. And in the meantime, I became a magician in Las Vegas and just did other things because it was too much. So that's partially why it took 17 years. There's other reasons as well. But, things take their own time. You can't get a mature wine in a week. Everything just needs to have its time to develop and to get its flavor.
Before we go to Tony, let me ask John, the book that you wrote was such a commentary on how we train or fail to train lawyers, in the typical Socratic method that we teach in law school. That book and that story of the paper chase, what were you saying about the way in which, when I went to law school, the emphasis was becoming a corporate lawyer. There was very little emphasis placed on being a people's lawyer, or something like Tony Serra. What are your thoughts on that? Because you practice, you're a law professor, recently retired, you've taught at a number of different schools. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I have lots of thoughts on it. When I went to Harvard Law School, and believe me, when I was there was no legal aid at all. Everybody was becoming a corporate lawyer. There was no question about it. You didn't even think about it. It would never even dawn on anybody. I don't think anybody knew that there were defense attorneys. Anyway, at its heart, that little clip of Hart in Kingsfield says something, I think, because Kingsfield is actually violating the very stuff he's teaching. He's teaching contract law, which is all about reciprocity between people. And there are implicit promises when a law student comes into a classroom. There are implicit promises about respect, about duties, about obligations. Kingsfield is violating all of those. So he's not paying attention in the essence of his being to the most important thing that he's doing. Does he know a lot of contract law? Yes, he's a genius. Does he understand the heart of contract law? No, he doesn't. And in that same sense, law school is violating the promises in a more general sense that it makes to all of its students, right? Think of how crazy the Socratic method is. Just think about it. By the way, I never call on a student in my classes, and I teach contract law and wills and trusts, lots of students. Never call on them. If they want to talk, they have to raise their hand. Why? Because I don't know if anybody's got anything to say. I'm not psychic. I can't tell if they can make a contribution. They're the only ones who know. So I say, have you got something to say? And miraculously, they raise their hands. Isn't it incredible? You didn't have to teach it the way I was taught at Harvard Law School. They were all wrong. It's a very interesting thing. When the paper chase came out, by the way, I'm just let me digress for a second. There was an absolute reaction in Harvard Law School. They said, this is the most horrible book that has ever been published. How did this guy get into Harvard Law School? There is some mistake. You know, there were people who wanted to take my diploma away. Anyway, in the last 35 years, though, they've mellowed out. You know? Now they're, you know, they've had me back. They've given me awards. It's incredible. You know? And why is that? Is that because they've changed in their heart? No. It's because the television program gave them so much publicity. I don't mean to be cynical. I do like Harvard Law School, but come on, guys. Anyway.
Tony, you know, you've dedicated your life to the law and to justice, and you're known to take on the most impossible cases. Do you think the justice system works? Do you think it has value, at least the value that we seek to attribute to it when we say injustice for all?
Nothing meaningful from an attorney comes from the seated posture. It doesn't mean that anything meaningful comes from an attorney when he rises. Let me share, in respect to answering your question, what some of the aphorisms are that are circulated around the concept. The lawyers sit in the Hall of Justice in the hall, and they converse with their client and other attorneys, and there's a little refrain that is oft repeated, and it goes, the only justice in the Hall of Justice is in the hall. So the perception is that justice is not rendered via the path of law or via the path of court. The justice, as the Native American says, is just us, to wit, the establishment. For the Native American, the white power system. For us in contemporary time, there is no justice. There's no justice in the courts. And that's sad commentary, and it's mainly predicated from my perspective on the swollen power and control that the executive class has now administered on the judicial class. The judicial power, discretion, separateness now has been vastly eroded. The kind of final comment, and I'll put it into a contemporary setting, is when it is said the law is fair. Oh, it applies to everyone equally. No one is above or below the law. The little refrain is, the street people cannot sleep under the bridge, but the chief of police and the district attorney cannot sleep under the bridge. See how fair it is? It's equal, isn't it?
Actually, we'll have the DA here and the chief of police so we can ask him. Now, Sheldon, you've written books about a fictional defense attorney, and you know, it's the stories that you tell really get into, I think, the issues and stories of our time, and that's why your books have been so popular. You know, first of all, you know, how did you become a writer? Why did you become a writer? And how did you end up writing about a criminal defense attorney in San Francisco, of all places?
I was not told I would follow Tony Serra. I need to go back and prepare a little more. But I learned something too. I guess I better stand up. I'm really honored to be here. I'm the toy department. I write novels about the types of cases that lawyers like Tony handle. And in the daytime, I work for a big law firm of the type that Tony probably would not hold in the highest of esteem, but I'm delighted to be here. I think if you talk to most authors, they will tell you that there is something hot-wired into our system that says, we need to try to tell a story. There is nothing at all in my background. I'm an absolutely accidental writer. There's nothing in my background that would suggest I should be writing novels. I grew up in Chicago. I write books about San Francisco. I studied accounting at the University of Illinois. I went to Bolt Law School. I've been a corporate and securities attorney for 28 years, now with Shepard Mullen. I've now written 7 best-selling novels about murder trials, death penalty cases, and courtroom drama. I've never handled a criminal case in my life. So all of you out there who are thinking of writing novels, there is hope. But I did have this feeling a long time ago, probably from the time I was in high school, that at some point I would like to try to write a novel. And I can't explain why. I do know that when I read Presumed Innocent on an airplane in 1988, I decided that if I ever get around to writing the novel that I will probably never write, it will be a courtroom novel. And Scott Turow didn't invent the genre, neither did John Grisham. Earl Stanley Gardner was writing courtroom drama back in the 30s and 40s. Anatomy of a Murder came out in 1958, which is the year I was born. Of course, we have To Kill a Mockingbird, which most lawyers and most lawyer authors will tell you was kind of the seminal work of why we got interested. And I started writing a novel as I was approaching my 40th birthday. I wrote most of it on the Larkspur Ferry, going to and from work every day. It took me 3 years, and that book became Special Circumstances, a story of a murder in a big law firm. It came out in 2000 and spent 7 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. So for those of you who have bought my books, I thank you, because now I don't have to practice law full-time anymore. But all kidding aside, I think crime novelists and readers of crime novels, whether it's lawyer books or whether it's private detectives or cops, in my world, unlike Tony's, I can control the outcome. I can get justice in my books because I can fix the ending. And I start, and most authors do, I start with the ending. I know who did it, how, and why. And by God, when I write that book, I'm going to make sure justice is served. And I think that's why people keep coming back to lawyer books in particular, because there's a lot of drama in the courtroom. There's always a murder, there's always big stakes. I've written books about death penalty cases, the stakes don't get any bigger than that. And I think it was important to me to have at the center of my books a defense attorney who is the kind of guy, the Tony Serras of the world, the person you would call if you got into serious trouble. And there are a lot of corrupt lawyers in my books, there are a lot of nasty people in my books, there are a lot of lawyers who are not portrayed in a particularly favorable way, but at the center of my stories are Mike Daly and Rosie Fernandez, 2 small-time criminal defense attorneys who work on Mission Street, and if you get accused of a crime, those are the people you want to call. That's my approach.
And they're both former public defenders, your characters, right?
Yes, they are. They are both former public defenders here in San Francisco. Without giving away too much of the story, there may be a return at some point to that particular office where they would, of course, be working for you.
There seems to be such a huge disconnect, between what you see on TV and even what you read about. I mean, most of the TV shows like Law & Order, you got a judge who's eminently fair, and you got a prosecutor who it's completely ethical, and you have a, defense attorney who doesn't show up half the time. And, these images really result in, I know this as a public defender, because the portrayals of public defenders are usually negative. Why? And I'll ask this to the entire panel, why is there such a disconnect between the reality of what really happens in our court and the way that many Americans are force-fed this really mythology? Tony?
I think in a corrupt society, an imperfect society as we have, there has to be a hope or projected ideal that there is justice, we'll say, in the court system, and that there's idealistic lawyers, and there's fair judges, and there's not, indelible bias and prejudice and racism and sexism and all of those things dissipate, when we approach the podium. It's just a way of blinding ourselves. It's a way of taking the placebo instead of the medicine. Great reform is required. We're threatened now by totalitarian tactics, grand juries, informants, mandatory sentencing. It's not very good, my friends. We're losing constitutional rights every day. And I think the way we appease our conscience, those of us who desire, I guess, not to probe and not to reform and not to speak out, is we pretend that things have occurred in courts that didn't really occur.
It sounds like all those things make great TV or, of course, a great novel. Paulette, you've spent so much time in court watching cases. What observations have you made after the hours and hours that you've spent? And you're creating not only art, but you're creating a representation of the emotional heart of a case. And what have you gleaned from your experience of watching so many trials?
Well, the court of artists is sort of like the fly on the wall. I have an aperture that is completely open because I'm trying to take in as much as I can possibly absorb, and at the same time I'm very focused on what I'm doing, and I have to remember everything that I'm doing. So as far as the kind of nitpicky particulars of a trial, that goes past me, but what I do see is that I believe there's a science called cybertonics or something where you get frozen to death. And that's kind of what it's like. Everybody's, for the most part, the lawyers in a trial seem very frozen. A poker match has more emotion in it. And they're holding their cards close to their chest. They don't want anybody to see what's really going on. And from the artist's point of view, it looks like they're holding back whatever's going on. And one of the reasons that Tony excites me as a lawyer is that he's out there. He is transparent. You can see exactly what's going on. You can even see it while it's going on. It's sort of like one of these things where you see the digestion taking place because it's all on some transparent piece of, behind glass or something. But so there's this combination of what is held back and what is sort of scrolled out or spooled out little by little. And what I see in court is, of course, the incredible inequities. I tend to have a great soft spot for people who are not of a life of privilege and whose lives are very challenged and who deal with them in the best ways that they can. Everybody wants, some sort of decency for their family, and everybody's capable of incredible rage and probably even the urge to kill. They're also capable of greatness and goodness if that side is sort of coaxed out of them. So criminals are, to me anyway, a group of people who have fallen on hard times. And I've been there. I've never really done criminal acts, but I've certainly been pushed to limits that could easily become that. And I think it's the humanity that is lacking in the courtroom. And I think that a lot of what we see in the justice system today is done because people can do it. And as we were speaking, as was spoken earlier about trials, people will get away with as much as they can. So for the criminal to be the bad guy, I mean, what about the politicians in this country? What about all these other kinds of criminal acts that are going on? It's I see that there's a lust for power, there's a lust for control, and there's a lust to put the lesserling down. And it happens a lot in court, and that's what I see.
We're going to have the opportunity to have you ask questions, and so the ushers have cards. And so just raise your hand if you'd like to fill out a card, and they will submit them to me, and I will ask you questions. John, you know, over time we've seen the portrayals, whether it's just take an example of a defense attorney, right? I mean, a lot of us grew up watching Perry Mason, you know, and you don't see those kinds of images now. And it seems to be almost seasonal that you have, you know, either positive or negative portrayals, but it seems to follow a certain cycle. I mean, we have so many shows on TV now about, you know, police and law enforcement. I mean, I think we have, maybe 3 different CSI series now, and you know, Law and Order Part 1, 2, and 3. What do you think accounts for, you know, the portrayal of our justice system and how it shifts over time, and also what you've seen in terms of what writers have done or haven't done?
You know, I was listening to Mr. Serra, and I was thinking, you know, actually the law is this huge thing, and there are parts of it that work really well. And when I started out, I was a young lawyer at a large Wall Street law firm. And believe it or not, we did really good work. And since we were typically litigating against or involved with other large corporate law firms, the other people did really good work. And since we were typically in federal court, the judges were pretty good. And so what I'm trying to say is it actually works in some levels. You know, it doesn't work when you get down to the criminal level, when you get down to people who are poor, frankly, you know. And it's a, you know, there's a stratification in the law that mirrors the whole society, you know. Anyway, I wanted to say that. You know, the show that I've worked on a bunch of television shows, and I've thought about this question a lot, and I have no idea how the cycle works. But one of the shows that I really enjoyed was LA Law. And the reason I liked LA Law was that it was about the kind of business of law. You know, a lot of it was about the real, you know, business. I mean, and you have to work hard in that context to get drama. You know, it's harder to write a show like LA Law because you have to find drama almost in the ordinary practice of law. You know, to my way of thinking, you know, doing a crime show or even a criminal defense show, that's the easy stuff to do. You know, there's drama that's inherent in it. The hard stuff to do is, say, a show like The Paper Chase, where they're going to the library. Really. So you got to figure out a way to make that interesting. And we did a show called Scavenger Hunt, an episode called Scavenger Hunt that I wrote. You know, it was a massive search through all the libraries. And it's actually a very exciting show. But you know, when we went to the network, they said, "What are you shooting?" We said, "Well, sir, we're shooting an episode with 7 libraries." And they were like, "We got to cancel this. How did Osborn get here?" You know, I mean, that's the hard kind of stuff for television. I'd like to see more of that. I am so sick of Law and Order. And all of that stuff. So I'm not really answering the question, but I'm getting stuff off my shoulders.
Let me get something then off of my shoulder. With no lack of respect, Wall Street lawyers are serving capitalistic corporations who have taken our democracy in hostage. You served one dinosaur fighting another dinosaur for the last firms, that is shifting money, from one capitalistic entity to another. So if you think that works, I think it's the manifestation of the malfunction of the entire system.
That's right.
Why do I think this audience is going to be on his side? I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'm saying from a functional standpoint, it works. I mean, Wall Street law firms work. They do great work. They do the best practice of law that is done in the country. And if you don't believe that, you're just wrong.
No, the death penalty appellate lawyers do the best work in the country. Their objective is valid, and their industry matches your industry and the competency that you speak of.
Get him, Tony.
This could be fun, I disagree.
Okay, I think we can agree that, when you're talking about the law, it's really a question of whose interests you serve. And when you talk about, for example, defending poor people or the criminal courts, the resources, just aren't there. I mean, it's interesting because I met the public defender in England, and he told me there that an indigent person can go to any of the biggest law firms, like Morrison Forrester, and ask them to represent you, and the government will pay for it. They will pay every penny. And he told me that they spend something like $1.5 billion there on indigent defense, or representing poor people in criminal cases, and they spend less than a third of that on prosecution. And I said to him, well, what do people say about that? He goes, the prosecutors are always complaining, saying that we're, out-resourced and, it's not fair. But it's just the way it is. Because that's the price of ensuring that a poor person gets the same amount of justice as a rich person. Here, for every dollar that goes into law enforcement and incarceration, there's probably about 5 or 6 cents that goes to representation of poor people in terms of legal rights. So, fundamentally, it raises, I think the discussion here, a very good question. That it comes down to really a question of resources. Sheldon, let me ask you, in the stories that you try to tell, there is a moral there. You do talk about the death penalty, you do talk about, and obviously there's a sensationalism that comes with it, but, what are you trying to communicate about the justice? Is it just entertainment, or is there something that's more than that?
At the heart of it, I'm trying to tell a good story and keep the readers turning pages if they're flying across country, but I do try to sneak in a little bit of gentle social commentary. I think if you get up on a soapbox, you lose effectiveness. Somebody was pointing out to me not long ago that I've actually written books that deal with homelessness, that deal with corruption in the church. The Death Penalty was a book that I wrote. The book that just came out, Perfect Alibi, has a whole storyline involving massage parlors here in San Francisco and how young people from Asia are being exploited. And somebody said to me, I read this whole book and I realized you had covered that, and you'd done it pretty deftly, and then I realized you were making a point there. So I try not to beat my readers over the head, but I do try to get some of that in, because I think that's important. If you're writing books about about lawyers and about crime, there are victims. And I do try to set the world right at the end when I possibly can, and that is, again, as I said earlier, the advantage of writing novels as opposed to trying real cases. The other point I would make, and everybody's kind of touched upon it here a little bit, lawyers are not portrayed in many cases particularly positively in the media, and a lot of that we bring upon ourselves. But I would also point out that, we all operate in an environment where you have to deal with the cards that are out there. Atticus Finch didn't have to deal with a 24-hour news cycle. Tony Serra didn't have to deal with bloggers when he first started in his career. I think of what's going on in New York City, where the head of the IMF was arrested, for doing some untoward things in a big hotel. And I found it ironic last night that Elliot Spitzer was interviewing people talking about these sorts of things. And that cycle is going on. And if you want to play a drinking game, who wants to take bets of when we're going to have the first appearance of Gloria Allred? It's inevitable. And, I think, and I'm getting off the point a little bit here, but, at some point, I think it was really around the time of the OJ case, where you had this confluence of a big public figure. It was a juicy trial, and cable news was just becoming, a force. It changed the environment in which we operate, at least the criminal system operates, because it's not just cases anymore, it's entertainment. It's a whole media frenzy on big cases. And I don't think that's a very good thing, but that is the environment in which we operate, and lawyers have to deal with that now.
Very good point. Okay, we have some questions. The question I have is for both John and Tony. You both agree that the criminal justice system doesn't work, particularly for poor people in the criminal justice system. What would you do to improve it? And let's start with you first, John. What would you improve? This is an imperfect society that we have. We know that. What can we do to improve it?
I don't know anything about the criminal justice system, but I think you need to start out in we need to have income redistribution in the country. I mean, it's crazy, and if you do that, in an important way, then a lot of these problems are just going to get fixed by themselves. They're fundamentally economic problems. And we used to have 90% taxation of, very high income individuals. We don't do any of that anymore. I mean, God, dividends and capital gains are taxed at 15%. That's just incredible. It's an incredible steal. So that's what I'd say.
Well, that's a subject matter that's, ripe for hours of discussion, but very quickly, we litigate in the criminal jurisform too many types of actions and behavior. So the first thing is take out all the so-called victimless crimes, all the so-called drug or drug-related cases. You can place them in medical forums or other social forums. Secondly, mandatory sentences have to go out. Thirdly, grand jury has to go out. Fourthly, the informant system has to be eliminated. The police powers, which are ever increasing, have to be at least stopped or minimized. Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, First Amendment rights have to be given more strength than they have, more resources for the defense, because yes, public defenders and good lawyers who are on the panels, they are defending most of the people who are accused, and they lack the resources. Becomes ultimately prosecution with unlimited resources and defense with very, very limited resources. The deeper issues are where the jurors come from and how they're selected, whether or not the judges are curtailing due process in court. Reform, and it can can only come from the inside, from us, the lawyers, from the judicial process, and from those activists who are interested in reforming the system. But we are in grave crises now because the judiciary has been swallowed by the executive, and the balance of powers is sadly amiss.
I'm going to have to bring the panel to a close in just a few minutes, but I would just ask if there are any closing thoughts that you have for the audience before we close it. Sheldon?
Keep following Tony. It's not fair. You know, the system is only as good as the people who are operating within it, and it's only as good as how the resources available to it can be used. And that's not an easy fix, and that's a long time issue. And I don't have a good answer for that, other than I am hopeful we can try in some manner to level the playing field a little more, at least so that the attorneys in my fictional world have it a little easier. But more important, you know, I have it easy. I write stories. You know, we met the gentleman who was on death row for a long time, and you hope, at the very least, you can avoid serious mistakes. And allocating the resources to make sure those mistakes don't happen, I think, is a very important thing.
In my view, be more activistic, have more courage, be manifest where there's wrong, be, protest it. Everyone should choose an issue. Everyone then should, behind that issue, strive for change. First thing is identify, and then to demonstrate, and then to do actions. And maybe, I'm old and I'm thinking how the 60s sought to reform things like war and racism, and they took it to the streets and they cried out loud and they demonstrated and they chanted and they boycotted tax. We have to wake up. We're in a slumber because life is fat in the United States, and we're willing to surrender constitutional rights for our own, image of self-protection, and terrorism abounds, and isn't the police force, wonderful to protect us? And that's all error. And what we have to do is point at what is wrong and seek in every fashion to address it within the circle of your own ability to communicate.
Well, my book is called Lust for Justice, and the word lust implies a certain passion. And I think that what is missing over the decades as I have lived is exactly what Tony is saying. The dissident voice has become either silent or is yawning itself to sleep. And we can all do something about that. I wrote this book because I wanted Tony's dissident voice to be heard. I wanted the art that I did of him showing his passion and his aliveness to be seen. I thought the two of them together gave a bigger picture than just one alone. And we're all capable of in some way voicing our passion, voicing our lust for the injustices that we are all subject to, and we're all subject to the law, and therefore it's important to get this terrible imbalance at least started pointing in the right direction.
John?
Okay. I'm not going to say anything about social justice. I have a thought for you, which is to go out and rent the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. It is a really, really good movie, and it's a really sophisticated movie. The script is by Horton Foote. You can't get any better than that. Alan J. McCool was the producer. The performances are wonderful. Every bit of that movie, when you look at it, you need to try to look into the actual scenes, what they're doing. It's fascinating. It's all shot on a soundstage. This movie is made at the same time that they're making, what was that huge thing in the sand? And Lawrence of Arabia. At the same time they're shooting To Kill a Mockingbird. They're doing it all on the soundstage. There's a reason for that. They're doing it in black and white. You know how they had to push to get that through the studio to make a black and white film? When everybody wants color, they finally invented Technicolor and CinemaScope and all this crap. And these guys say they want to do To Kill a Mockingbird in black and white, and they're going to shoot it on a soundstage. I mean, these are very, very smart filmmakers. So I suggest you go back and watch it, and hopefully think about some of the things that I said about it, and the time it's shot, the beginning of the 60s and what's going on in the country. And I think you'll find it is a greater experience than you remember it. Not because Atticus Finch is the smartest guy on the block, but because the movie makers are the smartest guys on the block. So.
Once again, we have all the books by our novelists here and our writers here in the front, or you can find them on Amazon.com. I'd like to thank Mary McDonagh Murphy, who joined us from New York via Skype, and Jonathan. And John is actually a descendant of the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and I read that John Jay. Paulette Frankl, Luster Justice, Tony Serra, and Sheldon Siegel. So before we take a break, I do have a surprise. A few years ago, I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I met an amazing artist, and I was visiting his home. And he had created this wonderful sculpture, and I immediately recognized it as being Clarence Darrow. And it turned out that he had created a number of just amazing sculptures of trial lawyers. And he went on to do one of Clara Foltz, who was the first woman attorney in California and became the leader of the public defender movement, and many others. And just by happenstance, I hadn't talked to Bill for 2 or 3 years. He called me, and he had this idea of encapsulating one of the greatest trial attorneys of our time. So, Bill, here.
This is not a magic trick. I've never met Tony Serra, so I had to make use of the internet to get a sense of who he was and the imagery. And what clearly came over was his passion for justice, and in some cases almost a rage for justice. And initially, when I started the imagery with the clay, I tried to show this passion for justice, this rage. But then I had a conversation with Jeff about Tony Serra, and another element came out was his great heart, his deep generosity, and his respect for those he defended. So I've tried to incorporate both of these things in this piece, and I've depicted him as I would see him making his plea to the jury on behalf of his client. And I hope Tony likes it.
This would be tremendously embarrassing to Tony, because Tony, doesn't like to be recognized in any way. But The reason we did this, Tony, and I want to thank the Trial Lawyers Association, the Northern California Criminal Trial Lawyers Association, as well as Stuart Hanlon and Farrell LeBron and Martel, is that we're going to also have a image review in a sculpture review in our trial room where we discuss our trial strategy to help inspire the next generation of attorneys with this work. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. We're going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back with our next panel. Please be back on time.